Hi, so I'm coming back for I guess a second installment for today because I would like to actually activate a little bit more in my own process. So I'm going to read with you and discuss this and process a little bit here in the interruptions and the stressors of the sixth hub. Okay, so we're at page 227 here, and we're at invalidation of intuition, ideation, and curiosity. And earlier today, I read the introduction for interruptions and stressors. And so now we're going to talk a little bit more about what some of those represent. Now, before I get into this, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are on my mind right now as they relate to this. And one of them is about the tie-in that the second hub has with the sixth hub and the ability to see, and how having an expanding emotional capacity for difficult emotions is is in large part about how we expand our ability to see difficult things. So, people talk about, like, for example, holding space for somebody. And the idea of holding space for somebody is actually that you can be in the presence of the difficulty of their feelings and their emotions and what they're going through without trying to make it more comfortable for yourself, so that you can actually, their expression, their feelings, their thoughts, like what's coming up, that you can be in the presence of it without becoming actually like enmeshed in it. And going back to chapter 6, the second hub is worthy of consideration at this stage in the game, because a lot of the things that have to do with being able to see something are related to the capacity for feeling. And how so one of the things is differentiation, is to be able to see something and not become fully absorbed in it, and to be overwhelmed in the sense that you're you're feeling like it's infiltrating you, and it's like, and the boundary is just really porous and kind of unknowable and unwieldy and unmanageable, and just the sense of like, wow, I'm kind of like letting something in, versus when there's a very clear sense of oneself, that to actually interact with something isn't like I'm going to be bringing that into me. So, and this is one of those things where even like a lot of like new age, but going back to The Secret, which is like, don't look at it. If you don't want it as part of your life, don't look at it, you know? Like, and one of the things that emotional capacity and even like emotional literacy and the like the robustness of the capacity in the second hub is what allows us to manage ourselves in the presence of incredibly difficult topics. Now, what we're talking about here in Parinama method is the topic of the recollection of difficult aspects of our own invalidation. And to see those can be extraordinarily difficult, because in some ways it's almost like refacing that sense of lack of safety, maybe. Or there's still like vestigial aspects of feelings of protection that like illusions can hold for us, because it's like what else we have to see when we shed an illusion about a dynamic with a person, with the reality of our own life. Illusion is as we'll get into when we talk about the shadow, is illusion, delusion is a protective mechanism, and then to shed it means that we need to see what was actually the reality, and I'll have plenty of examples for you, um, that are both I'll use personal examples for that. So so one of the things that I want to point to here is that where this plays into, like, a larger scale dehumanization process is that there is no so this is, like, the inside job part, and where we're doing this particular focus is, like, inward and working on this and expanding these capacities and this conscious reclamation is it has this the kind of, I guess, sort of paradoxical aspect of impacting who we can be in the world for others. And sometimes there's a sort of backwards thing where it's like, well, I need, it's like to first be, the oxygen mask thing. And what we're doing is we're actually like making our pie or whatever larger so that we have more capacity so that we can be present in the face of difficulty. And this is this goes in both directions. Like, a lot of times our folks are really comfortable with like a particular type of difficulty, or stress. A lot of people have been through a lot of trauma, are really great with like high stress. So it's expanding capacity for joy and happiness and delight. But it's also being willing to see things. And this has to do with humanization and consciousness of the state of people around you. And, with diminished emotional capacity, there can be a tendency to think, well, I'm already sort of over my head. I'm already kind of maxed out, right? Like the thing of, I've just got so much going on right now. I can't be thinking about the Armenian genocide because I'm so maxed out. And in the context of things, it's like, well, for the amount of capacity that turns out, in this case, to be true. So what we're talking about here is like the the increasing of our capacity is the thing that can change the world because of the ability to look at something without turning away, choosing to, spending consciously, spending the voltage, spending the nervous system regulation consciously, and deciding like, yeah, I'm not going to look at a bunch of things that make me feel like shit about myself, but I am going to look at something that points to the reality that there are other human beings that are suffering right now. And, as mentioned previously, the first thing is to just look, to see, without the notion of like, I need, what do I do? Because that's another thing. I think one of the things in terms of like a great deal of consciousness is realizing, how relatively meaningless like our singular action and and what we can, the power we have is like to a certain extent. But that the meaningfulness is that contributing to the humanity, to not serving not serving the agenda of like, make this to exhaust people so they'll look away. Just don't look away. Look. And the thing is, from that action, that action could arise. And that action could arise in the form of just having a conversation with somebody, making a donation. But this is a way, and I think that this is something that is, very much like in the fourth hub, where, if you're in a lot of kind of like the more like, very new agey circles. It's, like, kind of a, get your Prince Charming kinda, like, romantic love notions. Like, that hub is really about, could, like, pin your heart chakra on your Pinterest board with all your, sort of like wedding ideas and stuff like that. And it's not that that's not true. Um, but it's a limited notion. And in terms of the ultimate breakthrough, it really requires that hub really requires connection to your humanity. There's no breaking through it. There's no breaking through it. There's no breaking through that without consciousness of shared humanity. There's no breaking through it. There's no that, like, it's like the tightness in my chest, that, like, I can't expand, like, I can't love, it's like there's no it really requires the component of humanization. It really, really requires that. It requires the ability to look in the eyes of someone. Look in the eyes of somebody, I mean, I've had this conversation at dinner parties, by the way. It's probably why I don't get so many invitations anymore. Oh my god. But, the conversation I've had in sort of some flouncy dinner party environments is about homeless people and about looking at them. And, of course, there's exceptions. Of course, there are people that are out of their minds and, like, on the streets, that are, like, severe, like, really serious mental illness and drug addiction issues, right? That are dangerous if kind of provoked. I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that, part of the thing is just look at the person. Not even just say sorry, just be like, "Hi. Hey." And if you sense it's a dangerous person, it's like, of course, I get it. I get it. I get it. But un I realize this is inconvenient, and this is part of the thing where this isn't a consumer product, and one of the inconveniences and the reframings for me in terms of my conditioning about, um, my conditioning, yeah, about, like, what I previously thought something is that you work on, If I came into this realizing, like, what it is, I probably would have been really intimidated in this particular way. But the point is, like, the integrity of this really requires that it is presented, um, like, as such, And it doesn't mean, I mean, listen, it doesn't mean that it's like now all of a sudden you are personally responsible for, like, the liberation of oppressed people. It's just to increase the ability to not ignore it. That's it. I know. Because there's also, in terms of, like, the full circle on this, like, how the, sort of the loop in this, the repetition, the nautilus shell, whatever, is that there is a sense of, like, in anyone, of, like, having been forsaken, like, did God not hear my prayer? And not in everyone, I'm not gonna be, but, like, that thing of, like, how can nobody see this? Of justice, of the sense, like, in your family or in a relationship or in a situation at work, it's like, how can this injustice go on? How can I be treated this way and no one says anything? No one stands up for me. Nobody stepped in. This is why I mean, I think this is a lot of why there's just, like, there's some, divinity in the activation of having experienced trauma, I'll use the T word, is that there's the possibility of being, like, activated and awakened and brought more consciousness into this notion of, like, "Oh, this work is through me," like, to see and to speak up and to actually be present this is I. Who was supposed to see it? Me. Adult me or whatever. Like, just it's like, but who? It's like, and this is part of, what I'd call a reconciliation, sort of mending, unifying of that notion of like, how could this happen without anyone intervening? So even in so it doesn't mean every single cause on earth. It's just like, what's something that speaks to you to just to look at and empathize with and connect with. Just start with one thing. One thing. So there's that. So for this reading, I'm going to talk about invalidation of intuition, ideation, and curiosity. And so here in this hub is where we are developing, in this stage of adolescence, is when we're developing our like self-concept, self-reflection, creativity is flourishing. Curiosity is really blossoming in terms of being able to be expanding out into the world. And this continues into the seventh hub. So let's read. Okay, so recall the importance of the presence and mentorship of someone who is consistent and who believes in you. See chapter 8. Someone who fills this role supports development by strengthening our curiosity, interest, and delight in ourselves. And without the early practice of having someone see you as remarkable, it may feel awkward and uncomfortable in adulthood. As children, and sometimes as adults, we need someone to reflect with. So I want to say as children, and then there's and sometimes as adults, a lot of times as adults, we need someone to reflect with, validate our experiences, and provide space for us to process what we see and go through. So being seen is how we feel validated and connected. And without someone to do this with, we risk becoming delusional and disconnected. I'm going to hook that. If we take in information without a sounding board, we can create distorted perceptions, struggle to sync with others, and can even mistake biases and shadows for arising intuition. So as children, when we learned about the world, we took in new information like sponges. This includes forbidden topics that we learned of by experiencing the adult's reactions. Having an adult shame and label curiosity as impolite is a type of erasure, and it interferes with development in this hub. Ideally, a child is taught that differences are part of life and to appreciate and tolerate them in others. Being taught to ignore differences interferes with our ability to see and can lead to behaviors that range from being dehumanizing to dangerous for the well-being of others. So being taught, I'm going to read that again. Being taught to ignore differences interferes with our ability to see and can lead to behaviors that range from being dehumanizing to dangerous for the well-being of others. Think of someone who declares to have color blindness about race, or someone who ignores people in wheelchairs. It's understandable to want to avoid offending someone who's differently abled or neurologically atypical. But if our response is to deny or ignore, we potentially cause the stress and harm of erasure. Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of topical. It's interesting. I hadn't synced this with what I talked about at the top of this, but like the erasure of difference, to be like, "You're just like me." Like, that's actually it's like back to the last reading. Like, this thing where it's like the thing that will validate a person is if they're somehow similar to you. Whereas it's like, "No, you're interesting and you're different." Like, and it like or you're not it's just like it's not even you're interesting. It's just it's this thing where it's like this framework that is so, um this kind of notion of like this is how something gets framed is how it is relative to ourselves is we see how that kind of becomes problematic in terms of being able to expand um it's almost it's like tolerance and acceptance and just yeah. All right. Interruption here is caused by invalidating what is seen or experienced, such as children whose parents are chronic substance abusers or who abuse them physically and or psychologically. When children are told they're wrong about what they see and experience, for example, being told it's nothing, which is similar to interruption in emotional attunement, their initial calibration with the outside world is affected and they can lose trust in believing what they see or in knowing that what they perceive is a valid interpretation. This is like, actually, I'm going to talk to this in it. Like when people have survived their own disappointments by adapting with protective cynicism, primarily the domain of the seventh hub, we'll get to that later, they may diminish and discourage the dreams and imagination of other people to justify their own interrupted capacity. Yeah. Yeah. So when people have survived their own disappointments by adapting with protective cynicism, they may diminish and discourage the dreams and imagination of other people to justify their own interrupted capacity. Indeed. Yeah, I was watching the show, um, and oh my god, it's just so lowbrow. It's terrible, but I'm gonna tell you, it it's really bad. Yeah, no, it's just like, oh my god, but the show is actually about, like, what's it called, like, frogging or something. It's like when somebody, like, lives in your house and, like, watches you apparently, which is a thing that happens. It's a terrifying notion. But, like, in every single case, it was like the wife was, like, freaked out because there were things happening that made no sense, and the husband was like, "You're being crazy." And then what they did is they tried to adjust themselves to that, and I feel like that is, um like, I actually think the ability and willing to do that is like a downstream impact of socialization, of not being believed. I also listened to the podcast, The Retrievals, by the way, um, and it's a serial and New York Times podcast, and that has a lot to do about believing pain, believing women. Great. Um, but this is like and that's kind of a like there's a broader topic there, but so the thing here is that so if you were a child and there were you pointed things out in your home that it's very likely that the adults weren't even ready to deal with, that maybe they were keeping in they were shielding themselves from they're keeping a delusion around to protect themselves on some level, and then you surface it and you point it out. A lot of it one of the really prevalent examples of this is homes that and I use the example in here that have, substance abuse issues or even substance abuse issues is a really, like, clear one where it's like where a child will point out the behavior and and be like and be punished or shamed or embarrassed or yeah, or a combination of both. And what that does is that, like, you know, that runs the risk. It affects that sense that we see even in the 5th hub, which is, like, speaking up. It's like being afraid of speaking, but now it's kind of like the adaptation is to believe what you're being told you're seeing. It's like, "Oh, well, you don't get it because 'cause you're a kid. This is actually what's happening." Um, so invalidating intuition. So we're often protected from the complex and sometimes harsh realities that surrounded us as children. It's challenging terrain for a parent to navigate. On one hand, a young child needs to be protected from issues that are too complex for them. And on the other hand, children are highly intuitive and can sense that things don't add up. Parents often do the best they can. For example, a mother crying because she feels alienated or abandoned by her husband tells her child she has allergies. The child can sense that something's not right about this, but if the mother is trying to come to terms with the growing challenges in her marriage, she may not be ready to provide teachable moments to a young child. It's also one of the things I think that's important to point out about interruptions and stressors is that the notion of a parent as being like a fully matured, like fully developed, self-actualized person is not how this works. And so, um, that context, like putting into context that now it doesn't mean that that's like, we're like, okay, then, that there's accountability but there's also just like, like maybe the notion that there was like a kind of a plan that was executed hurt to cause harm. It's more just like negligence, honestly. It's like gross negligence. So if she does tell the child what's going on, the child may shoulder a portion of the burden and potentially add conflict into its sense of safety in the home. Taking this one step further, perhaps at dinner with dad, the child mentions that mommy was crying earlier. The mother quickly dismisses this, saying the child has an overactive imagination, and as a result, the child may second guess what it saw and question its ability to effectively judge a situation. So, yeah. Yeah, and I think if this is an area that you have any inclination to like second guessing yourself, if you're prone to second guess yourself, if you're prone to having a lot of outcomes where you're like, I knew in the beginning, I knew that I shouldn't do that, and I did it anyway. Um, like I overrode that. It's not like, like it can, I've certainly overrode my intuition because I know I have to do something, especially in my earlier adulthood for my financial, stability. And so I would go and work with people that I knew I could sense were terrible. In fact, I'd almost like pick them in a sense, and that's a longer story, um, but so for the reconciliation of this hub, it's worth potentially, exploring that. Now, invalidated ideas and curiosity. So people often wonder why adults lose their imagination, but it doesn't take many experiences of being told your imagination is weird or stupid to shut it down. Oh, this one's like that. Something just hit me. When children are told their ideas are foolish and get laughed off, they experience shame and embarrassment and begin to stop fostering their imagination. Our ideas are vulnerable. They have the delicate quality of anything newborn and require protection and careful treatment. When we're in the process of ideation as adults, we need to be selective about who we share with because other people's projections can be like a lawnmower ripping up the new grass of emerging ideas before it has the chance to take root. So children are naturally curious, and it can be a hassle for a busy adult to field endless questions that may feel boring or irritating to answer. When children are shamed or embarrassed about the questions they ask, they may begin to suppress and divest from their curiosity. Again, there are no stupid questions. Both Einstein and Da Vinci wondered why the sky is blue. Yeah, this is one where, I think there's like the implication of a parent, and certainly one of the things that came to mind is like socioeconomics is like a parent who isn't exhausted by having to like work multiple jobs and is actually present, and has the energy to for to like match the curiosity and show delight. And this goes back to like, you know, there's kind of something in it, and like one of the things that I think about is like I like remembering like as a child, like having a thought and feeling very delighted by it, like very excited to share it. Like it's like because it's if you recall, it's like if you'd have this idea, if you'd notice something, it was like it was the level of experience in that was just so novel, so that as when, it's like when you have an idea or you want to do or you saw something, you noticed something, the absolute delight of it, and then wanting to share it and be like, look at this, like, and like have that experience, that validation. Um, it's a really like alive thing. And to have it swatted away or embarrassed or viewed as like, "What? That's not that interesting. These are everywhere." Or, "Yeah, no, everyone thinks that." Instead of like, "Wow, whoa, what made you think of that? That's a really interesting idea. Wow, that's really creative. Tell me more about it. Like, you're really smart. I love the way you think. It's so cool to hear the way you think. I love the ideas. I love the things you notice. Helps me notice things." Like that, just that delight of having somebody point something out that you weren't looking at. It's like, wow, no matter what it is, even if it's something commonplace, like it's just, um, versus like, yep, yep, yep. There's this, like and even like you look at like the kind of like layering where it's like the capacity and one's own curiosity and delight, right, is meeting the curiosity and delight of like a child. And one I have this memory, and it's funny, this came up when I was writing this, and just came up again, is that when I was in just the beginning, like 7th or 8th grade here. Yeah, I might have been like just coming in here into this like 5th, 6th hub area. My brother had been come before me. He was 4 years older than me, and he'd come up when I was in grade school. He'd been a student, and he was quite brilliant, and, it was always yeah, it was, like, kind of universally agreed as, that he was really bright. And, I remember the English teacher that I had, and I won't name and shame her, um, at Pine Hill, though. I remember she was so fond of my brother and so straight, and I was so excited about her becoming my teacher because it felt like really having an adult teacher. Like, she was like the adult, sort of like like the grown-up English teacher. And she, had kind of some aplomb to her and stuff. And I remember, like, I wrote this paper, and I was so excited about it. It was like this creative notion. I forget, it was like The Secret of the Andes, I think was the book. I'd have to look up if that actually exists. Yeah, let me look that up. I wrote this book, and like, and so I remember that. Let me pull this up. Is that a real book? Is that a real book? Yeah, it's a real book. Ha. Yeah, that looks like it's right on age appropriate for what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah. What does it say? Yeah. Where's a little explanation on this? An Incan boy who tends llamas in a hidden valley in Peru learns the traditions and secrets of his ancestors. I just remembered what book it was about, by the way, and it is funny that I wound up going to Peru and having a very formative experience there later in life. But anyway, so I wrote this paper and I thought it was like, I was so excited. I had this idea about like that, like all like that all you could see was like feet on the ground. And like, it was like this mystery. It was like well beyond my capacity to write it. Like, but the idea yeah, my writing skill I don't think could really like catch up with the idea, but it was the idea that like maybe it like kind of cinematic where it opens up and all you do is you can see the feet of the people in his like village or something, like, because it sounds like that's um and like this idea that it's like a general it then and it sort of expands out and then you find yourself in the situation where you can see more of it. But this idea of like it starts with the feet on the earth and the sounds are and like and it's like pans out. So granted, so and I just remember I was so proud. It was so exciting to me. And when I got it back, it was, like, marked up with a red pen within a fucking inch of its, like, existence, and I remember, and I got a bad grade on it, and and it was met with disdain. I remember that she was like there was just no I mean, it was, like, very disdained, and it just changed me. Like, it changed my whole relationship, I think, to, like, this idea of, like, taking risks and being creative. What are you gonna do? It happens. Look, and then look, I wrote a book. Everything turned out okay, I guess, or something like that. But anyway, but just, like, so that whole thing about being really like, especially in, like, the nascent ages of being really cautious, and even in, beyond nascent ages, I'd say this as I guess, like, I'll call myself a former boss, is that, like, I tended to, I'm not gonna say always, I think I tended to have a lot of sensitivity around the vulnerability of presenting ideas and realizing, like, that you build trust with getting somebody's best work by showing them that you're interested in what they have to do, like, at whatever level it is, and building it up from there, instead of taking it from there and being like, "Wow, it's supposed to be here." It's like or like, "No, this isn't what I want." To be able to think to really see that someone else's, like, creative process and, like, the things that interest them are, like, really unique to them, and once again, I guess this goes back to relationship with difference. So, anyhow, I wonder what'll come out of that. Whew. Okay, so the next section that I'll read conceivably tomorrow is bad data, garbage in, garbage out. We're talking about social programming, so ads, images, and power. So that should be good. Should be something interesting in there. And it's interesting because I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from you. Like once again, I'm really at the point I wish this was a discussion like all the time. Um, like as far as like invalidation of intuition and even invalidated ideas and curiosity, um, whether that's something that resonates or there's memory of that or recollection or like a sensibility about like, oh yeah, that and like what it means to revisit that and even revisit it as someone cognizant of the fact that it wasn't the idea, it was the person's capacity. And once again, this goes back to second hub. It's the individual who responded, their capacity to be able to be present and hold space and and have their own curiosity, have their own delight, you know, and just to revisit that with kind of like it's like almost like kind of like the reparenting notion is to revisit it and be like, that was a good idea. That was a good idea. Like that was cool, you know, but whatever it was, whatever the thing is you pointed out or the delight you had or the stuff that it's like, isn't that fun? And how, it's like how fortunate it would be, it is for folks who have um caregivers who are like very tuned in to what their interests are and like want to cultivate that. It's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful thing. So, okay. So shout out to all the caregivers that do it in that beautiful way of being able to hold attention and match the delight. And then also shout out to everyone who struggles with the ability to do so. You have your reasons. Okay, so I guess that's it. So I will see you on the other side, and yeah, yeah, and I will be. I've donated. I'm going to be continuing to donate to the Armenian the Armenian refugee crisis, and I'm also thinking of something I can do that kind of like incorporates some party-nomish stuff in that. All for Armenia is worth checking out on Instagram and possibly donating to. So anyhow, that is all for now. I will see you next time. Bye.